Two state chiefs and a state legislator and a teacher of the year talking about their commitments to equity. So I'm going to be very brief and then turn it over to folks who really can speak to these issues from a deep well of experience and commitment. My name is Ross Weiner. I'm a vice president here at the Aspen Institute, and I'm the executive director of our Education and Society program. And it really is my pleasure this morning to welcome you to this release event and conversation. Public education occupies a very special place in our history as a country and in our democracy, and it has a very special mission. And that mission is to enable young people to fulfill their potential, to take their place in our society, to continue their learning, to find success in the world of work, and to really be active in their communities. And that commitment is a commitment to all, a commitment to students of all races, of all backgrounds, students of all religions, of all genders, students from different family income. And so that mission puts equity at the heart of the very purpose of public education. And so it is really inspiring for me and important for us as a country that we're here today talking about state chiefs stepping up to that commitment, naming it, owning it, talking about how they are going to lead for equity. So it really is my honor and privilege to be a part of this conversation today and to work with these folks. You know, we're also at an inflection moment in the history of public education. So for the last 60 years, there's really been an increase in federal authority around public education, and in particular with a focus on equity. And as that federal role is being recalibrated, it's then especially important for states to take that mantle and to name it again and to own it and to talk publicly about how they're going to advance that mission. And I will say ESSA becomes then an opportunity for states to lead for equity. And so we're going to spend this morning talking about a set of commitments that are much broader than ESSA. But I did want to acknowledge ESSA also provides resources and opportunities to advance the things we're talking about today. We have another publication, and it's in the back of the room if anybody wants to take a look, and it's online to download, around advancing equity through ESSA, strategies for state leaders. And what it does is really encourages state leaders to start with their own equity priorities and then look at how Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV can all be used in a coordinated fashion to advance those state strategies. And so if ESSA is something you're particularly interested in, I would encourage you to take a look at that. So I'll just be brief, but I think there's something that's important to me and makes today so meaningful is that Aspen as an organization, the Aspen Institute, is founded on a commitment to enduring values. And I think what we see here today is a terrific expression of bringing those enduring values to life. So when you look at the document that we're sharing today, right, one of those enduring values that unites us is a commitment to fairness, a sense that everyone in this country should have an opportunity to reach his or her potential. And public education plays a huge role in us being a fair society. Another enduring value that this document really speaks to is that our diversity enriches us. And I think that it's so important that we have, again, state chiefs and other leaders who are standing up and saying that diversity undergirds our success. It doesn't undermine it. And so you see that woven throughout this document as well, whether it's talking about what states can do to make sure curriculum choices reflect that diversity, what we can do to make school choice advance equity through having more diverse schools, and all through the document. So again, take a look, and I'm excited to now hear them talk about how they go from thought to action. And that's the last enduring value that I just want to mention before I turn it over to my colleagues and our discussants. You know, one of the values that we take seriously at the Aspen Institute is that thought needs to lead to action in order for it really to realize our values. And so I'm excited about the diverse group of people who came together to create these commitments. And now I'm excited for the next phase of this work, where we go from trying to name these commitments to trying to make them real and improve the lives of students in communities all across our country. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you, CCSSO, and the state leaders who have made these commitments. You're going to hear from several of them in just a minute. But now it's my pleasure to introduce Danielle Gonzalez, the Assistant Director for Policy at the Aspen Institute Education and Society Program. Thanks.
Thank you, Ross. Before I begin, I want to encourage people to follow along on Twitter using the hashtags EdEquity and States Leading. Now, as Ross mentioned, ESSA presents an important opportunity for states to use that to increase a focus on equity. But we need to recognize, too, that equity is about much more than setting long-term goals for closing achievement gaps in state tests, and much more than reporting against data. The inequities that our students face are complex. Everything from inequitable access to not just advanced coursework, but also to core subjects like algebra. Inequitable access to high-speed internet, to safe passages like crosswalks and crossing guards, to after-school programs, to just discipline practices, to high-quality pre-kindergarten, counselors, career tech programs, and the list can go on and on. Achieving genuine equity undoubtedly implicates a broader set of issues, policies, and actors beyond education, too, such as health, nutrition, housing, and the criminal justice system. That said, there is significant harmful inequality within public education that also must be addressed. It's important to acknowledge, too, that while states have great responsibility for public education, they do not directly manage schools and districts. They don't hire, fire, or assign teachers, and for the most part, they don't choose curriculum. States do establish standards, assessments, and accountability systems, and these, along with funding formulas, have traditionally been the main levers for driving equity in states. But results show that these levers on their own will not lead to equity. So it can be overwhelming then to know where to start or what to do. But policy leaders need to grapple with what specific actions they can take to concretely pursue equity in their state. So to answer this question, the Aspen Institute Education and Society program convened and engaged a diverse group over the course of 2016. We talked to state education chiefs in red, blue, and purple states, to Republican and Democratic governors, education advisors, legislators, state board members, superintendents, teachers, district leaders, advocates, researchers, and others about how they define equity, why we haven't been able to move the needle, and 3, what they identify as the biggest opportunities ahead of us. We looked across state law, board regulations, agency policy, other mechanisms of state governance, and considered the roles, too, of governors, state chiefs, legislators, state boards, as well as external organizations and partners. Now, not everyone is going to agree with every recommendation in this paper, and that's fine. But we do hope that there is something for everyone and something for every state to choose to lean in and take bold action to address the vast inequities that our students face. For me, I'm especially proud of the opportunities represented in Commitments 1 and 2, which push state education chiefs to look inward and address how they organize their state agency to lead for equity, how they learn to talk about race, racism, and privilege, and how they use their political capital and the bully pulpit to make the case that educational equity benefits everyone in society. This is indeed the time for bold action, and we're excited to stand by the Council of Chief State School Officers in this work. As Ross mentioned, it is a strong partnership and healthy debate that allows us to jointly put forth these recommendations. So with that, I'm happy to introduce Chris Minnick, the Executive Director of CCSSO.
So I went home last night to talk to my wife about my day, and I was talking about this, and I went on and on about how important I think this moment is for our organization. And she looked at me and she goes, "Yeah, that seems great. Did you hear Beyonce's pregnant?" Oh, twins. She didn't say that to me, so twins. So my wife is focused on the right things. So I'm just really excited to be here today. I think this is really a moment for us as a country. We are having a moment as a country. And this is a moment for the chiefs to step up and say, this is what we stand for and this is what we believe in. We're really excited to partner with Aspen on this. This has been a long road. Tony Evers, our president from last year, stepped up and said he wanted to make this his focus for his year as president, and you'll be hearing from him next. So I won't say too much about the commitments, but I do think it's honorable that Tony decided that he wanted to have some of these harder conversations with his fellow chief state school officers, and we were able to facilitate that as part of this process and working with Aspen. Danielle highlighted a couple of the commitments. I just want to talk briefly about number 8, which is valuing people. I think one of the most important things we can do is think about how teachers and principals are going to be leading on these topics. It's not going to be enough for us, just as the leaders of the education systems in the states, to prioritize this. We have to give teachers and principals tools to have these harder conversations, and we make decisions about how we might need to overinvest in certain places, because that's the right thing to do to have an equitable situation. So I think that's a really important commitment for us to make as a group. I think, we've seen a lot of work done over the past years around helping teachers and leaders get good feedback, become better at their craft, and I think that work will continue into the next year. Our new board president is Melody Shop from South Dakota, and she has made it a priority for us to stay focused on elevating the discussion around the teaching profession and think about how we're recruiting a diverse and highly qualified group of people into the profession. So that's what we'll be continuing to talk about as we go through the next years. Finally, before I do turn it over to Tony, I want to say that there's a lot of these types of papers in Washington. You can probably see one of these once a week if you wanted to. What's going to make this different is that we have the state chiefs ready to step up and take action on each one of these commitments. And we've been working hard with our members on the front end of this to say that this is just not going to be something we're going to put on paper, but you're going to see states all across the country step up and work on these commitments as a group. And so for that, we're really excited. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony to talk about his year as president and these commitments. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. And I'm just jazzed to be here. This has been a very interesting year. For those of you who don't know, I'm from Wisconsin, sound like it. And I spent a year as CCSSO president, and one of the perks of that job is to choose an area that you want to have the chiefs think about, respond to, and take some action. And I chose equity, and you might think, so why is a guy from Wisconsin choosing equity as his mantra going forward for that year? And I have to tell you, inequities abound in our state. Whether it's racial inequities, whether it's kids with disabilities, whether it's foster kids, whether it's kids that come from just extraordinarily difficult backgrounds that need that extra lift. That is absolutely an issue in our state. And actually, I believe that it is not only an issue in our state, it's an issue in every single state in the United States of America. It's a moral imperative of our time. Clearly, we're not going to erase inequities in 1 year, but by golly, we have a roadmap to do this as states. So promoting excellence for all, that's what's really defined our chiefs and our discussions over the last year, and I know that will continue. So I have to, first of all, talk about my colleagues who selected me as president, and their stepping up to the plate on this issue has been nothing short of heartwarming. They've every time we've been together, and even when we're not, we're talking about equity, whether in all its inequities in all its various formats, which is really great. And the work of the CCSSO staff has been extraordinarily important to us, and I have to thank the Aspen Institute for their great work, not only in advocating for this, but bringing together such a smart group of people that, frankly, many of them are in the room today to help us sort through this. And we really took it from the issue of how we can work at this issue from a state educational agency point of view. And I think initially I thought, well, this will be a short discussion. We can only do so much as a state, but clearly it's not a short discussion, and it's not short in length, and it's not short in the time that we're going to be working on it. So that group has enabled us to move forward to this point, and I thank them for that. Now, as far as my concern, I just wanted to, we have started to work on every one of these 10 commitments. We started last summer as a cabinet, and I'm really pleased with the progress we've made in Wisconsin. But I just want to talk about one in particular, and that's commitment 2. It talks about starting from within. And we don't have a large department, probably 400, 500 employees, but they're all across the state of Wisconsin. So having people come together that deal with also a myriad of things, from making sure that the school lunches are done well in our state to making sure $5 billion get distributed to our school districts and anything in between, teaching and learning and so on. We made a commitment as an agency, and all 400 or 500 employees made that similar commitment to work on equity. We've had two staff meetings in the interim where we spoke as individuals and as teams in our agency what we're doing in each individual person in the agency as it relates to equity in their area. In addition, we're encouraging, and I guess compelling would be a different word, compelling each staff member and their teams to go to participate in a long PD program, a professional development program called Embracing Equity. We have trained people within our own department to lead those discussions. And finally, every new employee to our agency goes through an onboarding process. You know, not only where do I get my check, but more importantly, how do we operate within our school community with 424 school districts. And each one of those employees in the onboarding process also goes through a significant issue around talking through the equity issues that face our state. So I feel confident within a very short period of time, we're going to have a group of people that can outdo me on this equity business, and that's a really important thing. They're the folks that are doing the work in schools. So thank you so much for this. I couldn't be prouder of the work of my colleagues across this nation, and especially considering there's such a turnover with people in my position, which is a problem in my opinion. But even the people that have moved into these positions have embraced this issue, so I appreciate that also. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to some of my colleagues. Carrie Wright is going to be talking to you, Brenda Casillas, Jillian Bailu, and Tony Smith will follow me to the podium. And let's start with Carrie. Are you able to sneak through here? All of them up there? Great, thank you. Hey, Carrie.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I really want to thank Tony for his leadership, because it's really what has brought us all together under a very common theme. And the one I'm going to talk to you about briefly today is Commitment 4, which is engaging the LEAs and provided differentiated support. One of the things that we've done in our state is to hire professional development coordinators and place them around the state. And we did this deliberately so that any superintendent, regardless of where they were, could contact a professional development coordinator and meet with them to have personalized professional development designed for their district. And that has been very powerful, whether it's English language arts, math, early childhood, or special ed. Those are the ones that we took at the beginning. They then can say, I need all my fifth grade teachers need help in this, and we've got the ability then to send a professional development coordinator right there, personalized for their service. We also hired and placed literacy coaches in our schools with the lowest scores, and that has shown tremendous potential for us, because we noticed that the scores on in those schools that have those literacy coaches have been even greater than they were before. The other thing that I wanted to do, was important to me, was to hear the voice of everybody that the work impacts. So I formed Teachers Advisory Council, and it's between 60 and 80 teachers that I meet with on a regular basis all around the state. And they have been so pleased to have their voice heard, because that's something that's been important to them. And the big aha for me was, after the first round, was that all the stuff that we were pushing out to the districts wasn't necessarily getting into the classroom. So that was very informative feedback loop for me. I also formed a Superintendent's Advisory Council. because they're the ones that do the work each and every day, and I meet with them monthly. We plan a joint agenda, but it also allows me then the ability to know what their specific needs are around the issues of equity. And the last thing I'm going to say is we also initiated what I'm going to call a spotlight. At each of our state board meetings, we have a video that is done by us and for us, and it really spotlights all the great things that are happening around the issues of equity and education in the state. Mississippi has not been one of those states that has been first and foremost thought of as everything that's good that's happening, and we have worked very hard over the past 3 years to change that image. And one of the things that everybody has really been appreciative of, our board meetings are very well attended, including the media. So the spotlight gives them a chance to see all the good things that are happening around our state, and we do that monthly. This is one of the commitments that we're making. We've got a lot that's involved with others, but I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to let you know what they're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. First, I want to just thank Aspen for partnering with CCSSO on this, and also for Chris and Tony on your incredible leadership. I've watched this organization mature over the past 6.5 years. I've been commissioner. I'm in my 7th year now. I'm the only serving African-American chief currently, that I think. And as we go into African-American History Month, this is of special significance to me, and the meaning that this organization is standing up for African-American kids, our kids with disabilities, our kids who come from all different types of circumstances. It is an honor to stand here with my colleagues across the nation and shine a light on the work we put and putting equity at the forefront. It's going to take every single chief standing up, using their bully pulpit to begin to talk about these issues and paying attention to these issues and holding ourselves morally accountable for the work of that we have in this document. In Minnesota, equity has been a huge agenda for us, similar to Wisconsin. In Minnesota, we have large achievement gaps, and we have been really working to address these and put them in the forefront. Today, I'll speak just about number 9. In 2014, we passed an anti-bully bill that established the School Safety Technical and Assistance Center within the Minnesota Department of Education. It was a really hard bill to get passed, which seemed like, to us, a no-brainer, that we want all our kids to be safe and to feel welcome. Our staff worked with schools to promote school climates through consultation, implementing PBIS, professional development and training for staff, looking at data, and supporting our families and community members when they have complaints around bullying. We also give a student survey every 3 years. It's a confidential survey for our students, provides really good information, but there's something different about our survey this past administration. We ask questions about that were pertaining to the LGBTQ community and transgender students. And what we found was alarming. We know that 55% of our transgender students reported having attempted suicide, compared with 19% of their cisgender peers. They were 4 times more likely to be bullied. That is why we believe that giving these surveys and looking at all kids who are a small percentage, sometimes invisible, like our American Indian kids too, when we say all, we mean all. And that is why I believe this school climate work is an essential part of our equity work to ensure that all children are healthy, are safe, and feel welcomed and ready to learn. See, because it doesn't matter, and our attention shouldn't be arguing with each other about what bathroom a child uses or who they love, but instead supporting our adults so that they can create conditions so all children feel safe, welcome, and can thrive. Thank you.
Well said. It's an honor to be up here with my colleagues, and thank you to CCSSO and the Aspen Institute for coordinating this important opportunity. And Superintendent Evers, it's thanks to you that states will lead the work to ensure that every student has access to a quality education. My name is Jillian Balo, and I'm the state superintendent in Wyoming. I'll be talking about numbers 5 and 10 today. For the better part of 2 decades, in Wyoming, we've taken equity leaps that have benefited all students. A series of lawsuits led to the creation of a state funding model for education that steadfastly asserts that no matter if a student lives in a town of 5,000 or 50,000, they receive a great education.
And no matter if a family's income is $5,000 or $500,000, our students receive a great education. So let me tell you a little bit about our equity challenge. Wyoming's a frontier state, 98,000 square miles, and many of our students live in rural and remote areas. 1 out of 10 families live in poverty. 1 out of 5 families live below the self-sufficiency line, making meeting basic needs a constant challenge. We consistently have the highest suicide rate in our nation, and over the past 18 months, our economy has seen its fastest and biggest downturn in state history. There is not a more important time to focus on equity in Wyoming. And that, with a mandate from stakeholders, our governor, our legislature, and me, will move forward with technology as our extraordinary resource. This instant, our legislature is placing a priority on an infrastructure for quality online learning opportunities. Thus, we can help create an environment that guarantees for everyone an opportunity for flexible learning anytime, anywhere. Wyoming stands out with our technology infrastructure with 100 gigabytes per second for connectivity to every school district redundantly across our state. And now we hope to be innovative with our pedagogy, our schedules, and our learning environment. In Wyoming, this is what we will all remain focused on, and while priorities for every state may be unique, our needs are not. We want to ensure equity for all students across the nation. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tony Smith. I'm the state superintendent in Illinois and really feel very blessed and honored to be here. Appreciation of the Aspen Institute and CCSSO and Tony's leadership. So I would say Illinois is all in on all 10, and I'm going to talk a little bit about early childhood, starting with our youngest learners. When I was a district superintendent, I deeply believed and led that our central organization needed to coordinate, align, and leverage all resources in the community for the well-being of students and their families. Does anybody know the saying, Dr. Winnicott, that there's no such thing as a baby? Ever heard that? The baby's always in relationship to others. The babies do not exist on their own. So the conditions of creating deep care and concern for children requires all of us. And we've said in Illinois that starting with our earliest learners, our youngest learners, is essential. So one of the leadership opportunities for the governor in the Children's Cabinet is to focus on early childhood workforce and increasing opportunities for slots across the state. We have just over 2 million students in the public schools, and we've just crossed the 50% threshold for students in poverty. So more than 1 million kids, and those are kids in our K-12 system, extraordinary need in Illinois. And when you talk about raising the standard of early childhood, sometimes we don't do as much work on raising support. So many of the women, mostly women of color, many non-English speaking women, are doing in-home care, and the credential push to raise the standard is pushing many of those women out of being able to care for those kids, and the microeconomies of small neighborhoods are shattered. So we have to take a deep and complex look at the structural issues to care for our youngest learners. And so we're working in the public school systems, we're working across health and human services to really create the conditions both for support to help in that credentialing and the support for early childhood educators, looking at workforce and community college and college efforts to actually keep those programs in place, and then to increase slots with our nonprofit sector. So it's a comprehensive effort. It's a big undertaking, but as James Heckman, who we have the benefit of having in Illinois, the return on investment is about $8 for $1 invested in early childhood. I think everybody knows that research. It matters, and we are taking that head on, and we think that caring for our youngest learners that helps build community. And having 855 districts across Illinois, I think of those as opportunity infrastructures to create a healthier state, healthy public systems. We need to create healthy conditions for every single child in every community, and we're taking that on. So Commitment 6 is kind of where we're focused today, but Illinois is all in on all 10, and really, really happy to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
So we have Mississippi, Minnesota, Illinois, Wyoming, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin's chiefs here today. It's not exactly a single part of the country. I think it's really an important statement for us to make that all across the country, we're going to be making these commitments and making change for kids. Before I introduce our panel, I just wanted to make sure I thanked Jackie Tucker, who is on our team at CCSSO. Jackie, will you wave at least so they know who you are? Jackie is the one who really led this on our side in terms of getting to the final paper. So she did a great job, so I just wanted to thank you for doing so. All right, so Allison, everybody knows Allison. I don't have to do an intro, but Allison Klein, the writer on for Education Week, Politics K-12, and the most important part of Allison is she knows education policy and inside and out. So I get interviewed a lot by people. Allison's the one I have to make sure I know everything I'm talking about before I get on the phone with her. So I'm excited to hear what she's going to ask our chiefs today. So welcome and thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for that introduction, Chris. And I'm never able to stump you or any of the chiefs, so. Hi, and thanks for joining us. As we've heard all morning, and I'll just sum up quickly, we're obviously in this new era of federal and state relations, new administration taking over in Washington, new education law on the books. State chiefs are going to have more flexibility than they ever have before. And I know because they have told me over and over and over again when I call them that they are eager to use that flexibility to get the best results for all kids. So this report, as you've heard, is the culmination of months of work, and it includes some real-world, nitty-gritty ideas for improving equity in schools. With us to talk about those ideas and what kind of leadership we can expect in this new era, we have a panel of very distinguished educators. Joining us is the State Teacher of the Year in Washington, Nathan Bowling. Nathan is a co-founder of Teachers United, a teacher-led education policy and advocacy group. And he currently teaches AP Human Geography and AP Government and Politics at Lincoln High School. Must be an interesting time to be a government and politics teacher. We're also joined, as you've all met, by Tony Evers, State Superintendent for Public Instruction in Wyoming. I'm sorry, in Wisconsin, sorry. Sorry about that. Tony, as you've heard, has made equity a focus of his tenure as president of CCSSO. And we're joined by Peggy Lehner, and she is the chair of the State Senate Education Committee in Ohio. So getting a state lawmaker's perspective, and Pedro Rivera, the Secretary of Education in Pennsylvania. So really great group of folks. So I'll just start with the report. We've heard from Tony about what these commitments mean to him, but for the rest of you, which of these commitments resonates the most and why? And I'll just, whoever wants to jump in first.
I can start off. I think,
Yeah.
specifically as I look at the commitment to developing people and especially around this world and this focus on equity, I think, first and foremost, when we're engaging in conversation around equity, you have to own that equity is something you're going to focus on, is something that you're going to be intentional about. So I think one of the first opportunities within this report is to really recognize the fact that if states are going to change, if states are going to ensure that all children receive a quality education, as we say in Pennsylvania, regardless of zip code, we have to make that a focus, and we have to be intentional around our focus of equity. So for us in PA, one of the areas that we've really started to engage in was creating a superintendent's academy. We have 500 school districts, and historically we had not brought superintendents together to engage in a conversation around instruction, around leadership, and now around this focus on equity. And it was interesting because we thought, to ourselves that, well, let's start small. We'll create 100 slots, thinking maybe 50 people will show up, 50 superintendents. And we were amazed, 93 superintendents, actually are participating on a regular basis, and there's a waiting list for additional opportunities. When we then created our unit around discussions on equity, we kind of set aside a weekend for discussions. Now, That discussion, that equity discussion has gone on to a specific work group and then a presentation of ideas, kind of thinking outside of the box ideas. And it now constitutes almost three units as part of this development session. So I think, one of the areas, if we're going to, really focus on meeting the needs of all children in our school districts, we have to first understand that it's important that we invest in and develop the folks who are going to be entrusted in caring for them.
Yeah.
I'm personally most interested in the aspect of the report that talks about resource allocation. I've worked in a low-income school basically for the last 8 years. And if you work in a low-income school, you understand that students who live in poverty have more disruptions and less stability. And when your life is unstable and unpredictable, like focusing on the minutiae of school becomes complicated. But we don't allocate resources that way. We say that a kid in the Seattle suburbs whose parents work at Amazon versus a kid who lives in Toppenish, Washington, in ag country, have the same needs and get the same funding allocations. And that's rubbish. And so this document really talks about how we're going to allocate resources and target the neediest populations, and that's what has to happen. If we think about education work and what happens in schools, students whose basic life needs aren't met have more trouble learning. It's an obvious axiomatic thing for everybody in this room who does education work, but the public does not understand that. And so fundamentally, that is an essential conversation we need to have is what are our high need schools and how can we drive resources to them? Then we can start talking about accountability. Because what we've done for the last 10 years is say, we're going to hold systems accountable with text-based accountability, but there's been no conversation about inputs, right? It's the inputs in the system that cause so much of the inequity. And so if we can change the conversation and start driving resources to schools that need the resources, then we can start holding systems accountable to make the change that we want to have.
Okay.
I guess it's to me.
Senator Linder, yeah.
I'm the only non-educator up here, so I guess I classify it as a politician.
It's okay.
From my perspective, one of the things that this whole discussion and the workshop, the report, have done for me is to sort of refocus attention on what we're trying to do as a nation. We talk about equity in here, and really since 1965 with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the involvement of the federal government in education has all been completely around equity. But that discussion has gotten lost in conversations and debates about Common Core, accountability, testing, teacher quality, all of those things. And the word equity has not really come into the discussion, at least I can tell you on a legislative level. And so I think it's very important that we sort of refocus what we're doing around all of those things and remind ourselves why we are doing them. And they have come about because of this huge achievement gap that we have. So from a state perspective, I can only deal with those things that perhaps are legislatively controlled. So personally and in the legislature right now, we're focusing on things such as early childhood education. I'm looking at discipline practices that I think are detrimental to kids, particularly kids that are coming out of homes without a lot of discipline. And then they go into schools and we end up with this huge suspension rate. In Ohio, for example, we have 36,000 kids under the age of 8 suspended last year. I mean, that just is mind-boggling. But at its core, that's an equity issue, and it needs to be dealt with as we sell it to the community, as we try to get legislation through as an equity issue and not just an attempt for the state legislature to be imposing their will on schools once again.
Yeah. So that's a great lead into my next question, which is for Nate. We've been having this national conversation about the achievement gap really for decades now. And I'm wondering, how is this going to be any different? How are these recommendations different from the reports that we've heard from Chris come out once a week?
Well, I want to put a pin in that point you made. For the last 16 years, there's been a bipartisan consensus that the number one priority of the federal government is to close the achievement gap in states. And that's been from the Bush administration, Obama administration, across the board, closing gaps has been a thing. Speaking personal capacity right now, that's not the priority of the current administration. And we're going to see a de-emphasis on gap closing from the current administration. And so these recommendations are the state stepping up and saying, we're going to lead. And it's absolutely, absolutely necessary. I'd argue for the last 8 years, the system has been the federal government saying, states, you need to do, and states, most of the part saying yes or I agree, a couple saying nah, we don't want to. What's happening now is the federal government's going to say, do what you want. And for places like Washington State, in most of Washington, that's going to work fine. But there's other places where this is going to give an opportunity for the state chiefs to show leadership and to do what's best on the ground in their community. It's funny, like a lot of people were really excited about ESSA. I was kind of apprehensive because when, personal capacity, when the NEA and Ted Cruz are saying we agree on this, I get anxious. But like local control is really powerful, and we have really thoughtful, intelligent, articulate, child-centered people in every state, and this is giving them a toolkit, this is giving them a set of recommendations, this is giving them an impetus. I'm really actually impressed that CCSSO has taken this on, because there's so many groups out there who are like focused on ed advocacy, but like to hone in on equity, to talk about social emotional learning as a priority, talk about funding equity as a priority, to talk about personnel as a priority, like that's changing the conversation. The conversations we've had about achievement gap for the last 10 years, 16 years have been test-based, right? We're moving away from that. We're looking at inputs. And when you're looking at inputs into the system, that's when you see the real gaps. Like, it's not an accident that certain children in certain schools that have more resources, and I'll just bang this drum all day, certain kids in certain schools have more resources, perform better. Okay, what are the needs, the basic life needs of our high poverty schools and our high poverty kids that aren't being met? And how can we create systems of accountability that can make systems respond to that? Like, that's what I love about this report. We're gonna talk about access to rigorous coursework. We're gonna talk about access to engaging curriculum. We're gonna talk about access to effective educators. And that conversation has not been happening for the last 16 years.
Yeah. So that also tees up another question. So this report is obviously being released at a time when civil rights advocates are deeply worried that the federal government, who, as you said, has been driving a lot of this equity work for the past 16 years, is going to be taking a step back. So is this report written basically to just make those folks feel better? And Tony? No.
Actually, I have a good friend from Wisconsin who is a longtime civil rights person, and he said, he tweeted out right after ESSA was signed, he said, states' rights back in the 50s, that didn't work real well for me.
Yeah.
And hell yes, he's absolutely right. So what I think will be the, where we can do the things that Nate's talking about is I think just about every chief in the room here and my colleagues have assembled a group of, I call it Equity Council in Wisconsin, where people from all the advocacy groups, whether it's advocating for kids with disabilities, NAACP, LULAC, Hispanic community, and so on. They're all coming together. They're holding my feet to the fire, frankly.
Okay.
And I believe they will actually do a better job than the federal government does in this issue. But it's an issue. I mean, we have to realize that as we transfer this authority to the state level, there are expectations that we're going to be able to make sure that those kids that struggle the most, that Nate's talking about, are served well. And that's now our responsibility. And the civil rights groups and others that I interact with, I can guarantee you they're going to keep my feet in the fire.
You know, I think there is a danger that we spend a lot of time worrying about what the federal government is or is not doing. At the end of the day, it's what we do. It's what we do in the states. All the people who have been yelling and screaming about local control better start saying, okay, we got local control, we better do something with it.
Yeah.
And that better be, we're the ones that are going to take charge of our communities and put the policies in place that are going to create equity, because you can't do that from Washington anyway. So regardless of what they say up here, yeah, it's good to have that support, but we can't use that as an excuse to not come up with very aggressive agendas on our own at the state and local level.
Absolutely.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I think, you know, first and foremost, one of the biggest distinguishers between a leader and someone else who's serving in the community is, you know, leaders make declarations, it's, you know, and you're expected to follow those declarations. So I think, you know, as we're looking at creating 10 priorities, you know, through CCSSO and the many things that we're doing in our districts, as Tony said, first, it's holding our feet to the fire and following through, and we're endorsing a movement. So at the end of the day, there's an expectation now that we're sitting up here and, you know, our colleagues in their community are making a declaration to focus on equity in these 10 ways. we are now, becoming beholden to our community and to the education community and our stakeholders. So I think this is the first step. Of course, the next step is how do you identify, deliverables, and then lastly, making sure that we're being held accountable by and being accountable to, the members of our community.
So that brings up another point. I mean, it sounds like you all want to be held accountable by folks in your states. Besides calling reporters if they're unhappy with something that's going on, what would be your advice to advocates for holding you accountable? How would you suggest they go about that?
So first, we all want to be held accountable for measures that matter.
Okay.
So when I say I don't want to be held accountable for every personal opinion someone has, but we do want to be held accountable as it relates to equity, on creating, establishing, and supporting best practice around ensuring all kids receive the resources, all kids, we have educational alignment to meet the needs of all students, and lastly, that we're looking at the individual communities to better understand who they serve, to differentiate wherever and whenever possible. So I think, first it's by, creating this narrative, creating this movement to share the information. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I think it's also important to understand that this wasn't, these recommendations, although being shared in a document, weren't created in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. This is the result of lots of conversations with, education stakeholders, community members, teachers, building leaders, district leaders, state leaders, and beyond. So I think just the process of getting here has created a constituency group or an advocacy group or a stakeholder group, whatever you think is, you identify with, that will hold us all accountable to focusing on the needs of kids.
And one of the specific strategies in the document that I find compelling is the idea of bringing groups together, whether it's economic development people, health people, workforce development, so on and so forth. They all have data that impact kids' lives, and braiding that data together to paint a picture of how are our kids doing in our state. And that brings other people accountable too. I mean, it'd be great if we could all say, Nate, would you fix that? That's not going to happen, maybe. But the issue is there's more to it than what happens in the four walls of a school. And as we can braid that data together and on an annual basis visit that data and develop goals around that data that includes all those other factors, I think we can make a huge difference in lives of kids.
Let me add to that data piece, because one of the things I think that's really helpful is if we start personalizing, localizing that data. Mm-hmm. Very often you look at these very broad, sweeping things, X number of kids in the U.S. are in poverty, blah, blah, blah. One of the things we recently did in our community, I had mentioned it to a consortium of leadership folks about the data walk that we did at the Aspen Institute and how powerful that was. So they actually created this whole book with local data from Dayton, Ohio, that when you pull people into a room, you're saying 4 out of 10 kids here in Dayton, Ohio enter kindergarten not ready. And that means much more meaningful than national statistics. So I think that kind of thing is a very helpful step for communities to take.
Yeah. So the Trump administration has made it very clear that we're going to be focusing on school choice over the next 4 years. That comes at a time where there's been a lot of criticism, including from the NAACP, that school choice, some schools of choice, including charters, aren't really fulfilling their mission of providing better options for poor kids and kids of color. So can you talk about how state chiefs can balance the need for equity with this push for expanded school choice? Are choice and equity mutually exclusive?
So the answer, so simple answer to your last question, no. Choice and equity are not, mutually exclusive. I think, first and foremost, when we're having a conversation about choice, it's important to really include an identifier. It has to be quality choice. And I think part of, the narrative that's been created, over the course of the past, maybe decade is when looking about choice, it's almost in some cases and in some localities, and for us, I can speak for Pennsylvania, in some instances where it's choice for choice sake.
Yeah.
And we've created this this narrative around choice. And it's funny when we discuss the need for equitable public schools. The first word that usually will come out of someone's mouth is accountability and holding the system accountable, which is absolutely the conversation we should be having. However, when you start to really dig deeper around the pure advocacy of choice, very rarely do you hear that within the first 5 words shared and discussed is a system of accountability or a measure of accountability. So first and foremost, I think if you're looking at choice in itself, it doesn't automatically, it's not automatically inclusive of equity, it's not automatically inclusive of the need for transparency, it's not automatically inclusive of the need of for accountability. And I think first, if we're going to create a system that that really meets the needs of all children, we have to understand exactly what those needs are. And build a system of accountability that's going to force us to meet those needs. And right now, the conversation around choice doesn't do that.
In our state, it does. I will say that we've had publicly funded private and parochial schools for several years, especially in the Milwaukee area.
Yeah.
And we're at the point now, after 25 years, that we are talking about the fact that we need to have, unlike what our likely Secretary of Education talked about the other day, we do expect to have good accountability for all schools. And that I think is it has to be equal accountability. We have to hold both systems equally accountable, collect data. And so we're in a rudimentary phase right now. I think we're gonna get there. But that is the basic tenet. We have to make sure that all publicly funded schools, whether parochial, private, or traditional public schools, have the same accountability system.
Yeah. We've really struggled with this in Ohio because we have one of the largest charter school movements, and we also have a number of different voucher programs. So we have a lot of choice in Ohio. But I think we're starting to look at that question saying, is giving a child a choice between 2 failing schools a choice at all? It's not. And that what we really need to do is quit talking about, choice for choice's sake, like you said, and start looking at how do we provide children choices of high quality.
Focus on kids.
Just focus on the kids and get off this. I don't care what the building looks like, or who the government structure is. If they're providing quality education, that's fulfilling our mission.
And I will just quickly add, when I share focusing on kids, it's understanding that we have kids who are English language learners who have specific needs. We have special needs students who have very specific needs. We have students in low socioeconomic communities who may not have the resources, as Nate shared earlier, that have specific needs. So when you're looking at options, it has to be an option that meets the needs of students, not an option that meets the needs of politics or adults.
Okay. So I know this idea of equity goes well beyond ESSA, but I'm the federal reporter for Education Week and I cover ESSA implementation. So I'm going to take a prerogative. How can states use that new law specifically to advance these goals? And do you think an equity agenda needs to be baked into this accountability system and a school improvement system, or can it be sort of done outside? Some of your recommendations really don't necessarily need to be incorporated into an ESSA plan.
Yes, they have to be baked in. Just from my vantage point, and I love the question, because whether we look at, that's kind of where our flexibilities exist in those 2 arenas, accountability and school improvement. And if we don't use equity as the lens by which we implement ESSA, we'd be making a horrible mistake. We have to use ESSA as a building block. Is every equity issue part of ESSA, or part of ESSA? No. A part of every part of ESSA? The answer is no. But the fact of the matter is baking it into both the accountability. Small example, school improvement. If we believe that social emotional learning and making sure that kids are socially and emotionally well, that mental health is being taken care of, those kids that are struggling in those areas are never going to read anyway. So why shouldn't that be part of our school improvement plan as a small example? I think it's a huge issue. So yes.
And if it's not, I totally agree it needs to be baked in. If it's not, then you have a lot of people wondering, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
And it comes back to my original point. We're looking at Common Core for what reason? Why are we looking at accountability? If we don't aren't fully conscious that we're looking at it in order to create equity for kids, then our rationale for doing it goes away. So I don't see how you separate it.
And we saw LESA as an opportunity. We had already started discussing, how to best reimagine education for our Commonwealth. And, with the passing of ESSA and the opportunity to create a new plan, we partnered with CCSSO and, worked to create stakeholder work groups to make recommendations around 4 specific areas. So teacher preparation, accountability, assessment, and educator effectiveness. So once you're in and kind of getting it. And through this, we understood by engaging as many members of our broader community, so starting with our work groups and then, pretty much branching out until we've met with over 1,000 stakeholders. It wasn't just about policy change, it was about creating an educational movement. And, and we didn't, we staffed it as a Department of Education. We allowed everyone to share, their thoughts and opinion. And if you have a diverse set of stakeholders coming together, equity is, the conversation of equity always comes up early and often because they personalize, this movement and this opportunity to engage in policy. So I think first there was an opportunity with ESSA to change the narrative, to really focus on the educational needs of students. But most importantly, if we don't engage, our broader local stakeholders, both, formal education community and the informal education community, we're really losing an opportunity to make real change.
Okay. So state chiefs are obviously very powerful figures. You're going to be even more powerful going forward. But there's also just huge turnover in this position. And I know that because I cover all 50 states and I'm having to get to know new state chiefs all the time. The state chief's tenure is really shorter than I think it ever has been. So how can states and districts and teachers make sure that this equity agenda, this push, can survive all of this turmoil at the top, all of these leadership changes?
So it's interesting where all the state chiefs snickered when I said more powerful than ever. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I seem to getting more, every position I have, I get more and more bosses and more and more opinions. So I think, my opinion, I have the conversation often that we do have, we do have a pulpit to speak from. We have access to broader audiences. And I think, for me, I think our greatest responsibility is to inform and mobilize the community to focus on education. I don't ask anyone to adopt my opinion, but I do ask that they take the time to become actively engaged and informed. So I think, first and foremost, education is always the big topic of discussion. That's never changed. However, we do have an opportunity now, both through media, social media, through advances in technology, to create a more informed constituency than we ever have had. And I think as number one priority as a state chief is to really do a better job of informing our stakeholders.
Yeah. And I'd view it from 2 angles. One is we have activated in our states advocacy groups around ESSA, and basically ESSA has served as a catalyst to talk about education in general. So I think that will remain in place whether chiefs stay or go. And but I think we also need to activate in Wisconsin 60,000 classroom teachers who do hard work every single day and make sure that they are committed, have that commitment too. I know they do, but how will they have the voice to do that? I think is a real question mark in my mind. And we're working hard around that issue of teacher voice and teacher leadership. And we're hoping to, use your term again, bake that in, and bake the equity piece in. So we need to work on it from the kind of public policy vantage point with advocacy groups, but we also make sure that I bring along 60,000 Wisconsin teachers to the
I would add, we're in a once-in-a-decade kind of rethink of accountability. And so the accountability models that are created in the next year are going to outlast any chief, or most chiefs. There's some long-serving ones out there. So I think it's really important to put equity in accountability models. One of the things I advocated for in Washington State is teacher assignment. So the most important in-schools factor impacting student achievement is teacher effectiveness, period. Now the thing is longevity is not a proxy for effectiveness, but I'm a lot better now than I was in year 4. So at the highest poverty high school in the city of Seattle, average teacher tenure is like 4.5 years, and at the most affluent it's 15. Okay. if the city of Seattle was being held accountable for equitable distribution of teachers and for measures like that, they'll respond, right? And so if we want equity to outlast the person in office, it has to be baked into the accountability models we're building right now. And again, ESSA is a once a decade, twice a generation opportunity to rethink this. But if we want these things to be there, we have to have we have to talk about social emotional learning, we have to talk about school climate, and I know there's a danger of putting 27 things in an accountability model, because if you're accountable for everything, you're accountable for nothing. But like, there's some really core, important, impactful levers that we can put in the model that would provoke districts and provoke buildings to make changes.
Anything you want to add? Okay. So we have just a couple more minutes. I have time for about one more question before we're going to turn it over to Q&A. So the report obviously doesn't mention the name of the nominee for Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos. But I'm a reporter, and she's the biggest story on education policy in Washington right now. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask about her. From what you've seen, do you think that chiefs, teachers, and district leaders and state lawmakers are going to be able to work with her to advance an equity agenda?
Well, we have to. We've made that commitment, and if she doesn't own that commitment, we have to compel her to be in a position to do so. If the federal government, state government, we have to get along, and regardless of who is in that position.
Yeah.
But if the person in that position doesn't share what I believe, and I think my three colleagues here believe, to be the moral imperative of our lifetime, then we have to make sure that he or she knows that.
Okay.
You know, kind of repeating myself, but
Yeah.
Our state legislature clamors all the time for local control, state control. Now, we cannot turn around and say, because we don't have someone at the feds who's telling us what to do a certain way, we're not going to do that.
Right.
It's up to us, and we have the ability to do it, and so be it. So we'll move on with or without.
That's the perfect answer from those two. And
Right,
what
I was going to say, I bet
what I'd
you
like
seem
to-
like you can't wait to jump in.
And what I'd like to
I'm an elected official.
and exactly what I would like to hear from people who are elected officials. But speaking for the profession, I showed a video of the confirmation hearing in my classroom to my students in
Oh,
my government
wow.
class.
I'm sorry I wasn't there. That would have been a great story.
And so I have students in my class who are in a thing called Teach 253, which is a teacher preparation program. We can grow our own. We're trying to develop more teachers. And there were multiple questions she was asked that my 12th graders were like, how come she doesn't know about special ed law? Education is too important to be handed to a crony. And I have a fundamental, like deep in my core objection to the fact that, sorry, room's getting itchy over here. I have a fundamental objection that somebody who is so grossly disqualified and incompetent is going to be the leader of our nation's schools. And the thing for me is in my year of working with CCSSO, I know that at any moment there are 50 state chiefs around the country, across the political spectrum, conservatives, liberals, progressives, who are auditioning for that job every day. And there are people out there who I may disagree with on every policy matter, but they know what they're talking about. And I can't say the same thing for her. And so for me, if I was 2017 Teacher of the Year and I had are you gonna go meet the Secretary of Education? Are you gonna go to the White House? That's a soul-searching conversation that I would have to have. And I'm yet to encounter an educator, an actual practitioner, who says she's competent or qualified.
But Nate, you could educate her.
And if Betsy DeVos is watching this on a live stream, hit me on Twitter and I can learn you some stuff.
Secretary Rodone, do you want to follow that?
It's always hard to follow Nate, first of all. Next time I'm sitting on the other side.
Yeah.
No, I think, so it's a question that has come up a number of times, and I've tried to create, as a chief, I tried to come up with a pragmatic approach to it. And here's how I kind of narrowed it down. As a classroom teacher, I've worked with principals that I didn't necessarily care for, and school policies that I didn't like, but at the end of the day, I came in every day knowing I had 35 kids in front of me at a time that had to be educated. As a building administrator, I didn't always agree with the policies and practice at the district level, but I knew, at that time, I had 1,200 kids I had to care and educate each and every day. And as a state chief, I may not agree with everything, all the decisions being made, but at the end of the day, I have 1.74 million students that are depending on me to advocate for them and to create state policy so that they can best be educated. So every day we're going to come to work and we're going to try to do our best for the children we're entrusted to care for. Sometimes it may complement what's happening at the federal level. Sometimes it may not, or work contrary to what the belief system is there. But at the end of the day, we're in this role because we care about kids and we care about education, and nothing that happens above us or nothing that happens politically is going to change that.
Okay. Well, now I'm going to turn it over to you all. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Do we have somebody coming around with a mic? Okay, I'll just front row right there, or second row, sorry.
Stephanie Whitgornet, Alliance for Excellence. Hi, I'm Stephanie Whitgornet from the Alliance for Excellent Education, and great panel discussion. My question is actually about high school. So if we think about the election and the concerns across our country about the economy and access to jobs, we really should be having a conversation about what is it that young people need to know and be able to do when they graduate from high school. We have the benefit of a high school teacher on this panel, so would love to hear from you something that you're thinking about doing to create learning opportunities. If this is in your ESSA plan, can you tell us how you're addressing it?
Will you share the story about the manufacturer with the tests in your state?
I'm trying to think. I'm drawing a blank. Which one?
You talked this morning about there's a manufacturer in your state who administers a test to future employees.
Well, we're really struggling, like a lot of people are, with what graduation standards, requirements are, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that sort of has come to our attention is that major manufacturers or businesses offer a test that they're going to use as the basis for hiring or firing, or hiring kids. And it looks very different than the tests that we give that measure, literacy, et cetera, et cetera. And I just was saying this morning that I thought one of the things we ought to look at is that just that very practical test that measures basic math, basic English, soft skills, and that are really going to make the difference in whether you hire someone or not. So is that what you are talking about, Nate?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And I think most states are involved in this, the idea of dual enrollment where kids can get high school credit and college credit simultaneously. And we've doubled the number of students in our state that are doing that every single year. And I think that's extraordinarily important for two reasons. One is that it keeps kids engaged and they can try on college in a way. And actually, if they're working with our technical college, they can try on a career. And some of the best successes I have found around this notion of kind of blurring the lines between 12th grade and beyond is that kids can try on a career and say, this isn't for me, this sucks. And not waste time and money as far as changing careers after you have 4 years of college and the enormous student debt that happens. But I'm really excited about what's going on in the high schools across the country. I think there's really extraordinary things going on, but we need to kind of blur the lines between what happens in school to what happens outside of school.
Yeah, and I can share quickly on our website, we actually just put up, it's been a few months now for public inspection, some recommendations that we're making around our graduation standards. So we had about 30 geographically driven stakeholder sessions, and we had about 1,300 educators, administrators, industry leaders, business leaders, and education advocates come together to really map out what they felt we needed to focus in on to ensure we have a college and career ready graduate when leaving our high schools. So we created these 4 pathways to be holistic, and a lot of that is online. But I think one of the areas that we're really proud of is that as I shared, thousands of folks face to face, and now that it's been online, a couple more thousand providing feedback as to what they like to see as considered as part of the graduation standards. We will now be working with the General Assembly this session to hopefully realize those four pathways to graduation.
Yeah, and an equity issue too can be baked into the system. The whole issue of how many kids of color, how many kids that come from poverty are involved with AP courses, for example, international baccalaureate courses. I think programs. I think that's just an extraordinarily important thing. A lot of times we talk about proficiency in that arena. I think we need to talk about participation also. I think we do both, but I think we have to do both, because the last thing we want to do is be locking out kids that are struggling for any number of reasons from those high-quality courses. I think it's critical.
You know, at the same time, that's, at least in Ohio, sort of posing a challenge to us, because
It was a challenge.
when your goal is to make sure that everyone has access to AP, everyone has all these things, you tend to set your standards for graduation up here, which we're finding is leaving an awful lot of kids not meeting those standards, and you can't not give them a diploma. So that is a real
No
push
question.
and pull
Yeah.
problem in there that
Yeah.
we're struggling with.
I'm sure that's way across the country, but we have to look upward instead of the downward. And the more kids we get involved, the better off we are as a nation.
I think one of the really important things, though, is like meaningful CTE programs.
Yeah.
Basically, in my building, if you want to go to college to a four-year school, we got you. There's a track for that.
Yeah.
If you want to be a welder, we have this amazing welding program where kids come out like 2 years after high school making more money than I do. We got you for that. But like everything else is kind of mushy, right? And so you talk about intentional pathways. I think pathways are really important. If you want to be a radiation therapist, right? You want to do X-rays. Like, what's the high school pathway you take? Right?
Yeah.
And so articulating clear like career pathways throughout high school is something that needs to happen nationwide, but has to happen at the state level out.
It's a real challenge.
Yeah. That was a great question. Over there in the back, right there.
So in the midst of the teacher shortage, especially in our urban school districts, oh, thank you. Sorry, Betsy Aarons with the urban, it's not on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? I'm Betsy Aarons with the Urban Schools Human Capital Academy. In the midst of a very significant teacher shortage, especially in our urban districts, so that the access that students are having are almost not even to a teacher. It might be to day-to-day substitutes who are filling in. Are any of your states holding university schools of ed? Are you partnering with them? Are you holding them accountable in any way for who they produce, especially the types of students they produce in critical shortage fields and the diversity?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I can share. Start. Oh, go ahead. You want to just start? Yeah. So for us, Pennsylvania is absolutely suffering a teacher shortage. Over the past 5 years, we have a 52% decrease in the number of first-time certified teachers. And only 4% of our teachers in the Commonwealth are teachers of color, which is also a significant concern for us. So we've looked at a number of, so there are a number of strategies that we've been currently engaging in to focus. So first, what we're identified as kind of that low-hanging fruit. How do we start to identify individuals that are interested in going into the education pathway? And in doing that, we realize we have 1.4 million Commonwealth residents that have over 20 collegiate credits and no degree. And so one of the areas that we've been focusing is to create these college re-engagement centers. So currently we're looking at 2, potentially even 4 geographically. So bringing folks in to counsel them around financial aid, if that was the issue, around the career pathway and education, especially in those high need areas. And especially when looking at candidates of color, having identified that as one of the potential pathways for someone with credits who wants to attain a degree or a pathway. Secondly, we're working with colleges and universities, community colleges, college universities, and high schools. We have 2 pilot models going on in Pittsburgh and one about to start in Philadelphia to engage in the 2+2+2 model, where you're knocking out 2 years of high school, 2 years of gen ed, partnerships with a community college, and then 2 years in a certificate program around high needs areas. And one of the specific partnerships I hope to come to fruition over the next year is working with some of our HBCUs to realize that pathway, especially in our urban communities. Lastly, we also realize there's a real disconnect between our high school graduation requirements and our college acceptance requirements. They have been speaking to each other for a number of years, so now we're looking at alignment there to better create a pathway into all colleges, but specifically the colleges of education. and hopefully moving away from this teacher prep model to apprenticeship model, so that we're giving teachers, prospective teachers, more practical application in the classroom. Because, and I'll share this last story, which was interesting, and CCSSO was involved with us. When we did our teacher preparation work group for ESSA, we asked the higher ed community, so what does a first day of the first year recent college graduate teacher look like? And the higher ed said, someone who's equipped with the skills and the knowledge needed to become an effective, instructor, sharer of instruction, knowledge, blah, blah. And then we asked the high school administrating teacher, so what does the first day of the first, year class of teacher look like? And they said, someone who's ready to teach. So we realized, we took a step back and said, we need to have a fundamental, foundational question around what does it look like today, to prepare, train, and educate tomorrow's teacher force. And that's kind of led us in a direction to rethink our colleges of ed.
Yeah. The real challenge for us has been not so much a teacher shortage. We were way over producing elementary ed teachers, for one thing. So how do we take some of those elementary ed teachers and steer them towards science, math, foreign language? That's been our real challenge. And one of the things we've been playing around with is alternative licensures, trying to bring people from the industry into teaching. Obviously, that becomes a little dicey. The unions are fighting that for various reasons. But I think we're getting over that, and I think people are starting to recognize that we just, kids have to have math and science, and we just have to get there one way or another. But I think the teacher shortage thing is sort of I think it's a temporary problem, frankly, and we can probably best address it by elevating the profession to where it belongs in the first place.
Yeah,
get past some of the morale issues that have sprung up in recent years, and I think we'll see people flooding back to the teaching profession.
Yeah, me too on all those. We can't spend almost a decade now disparaging the profession and the people in it and expect people to say, yeah, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And it makes no sense. And in addition, in our state, teacher pay has declined and take-home pay has declined even more. So you kind of put all those things in the same basket. And the first one we can do for free. We can just stop talking about teachers the way we do. It's free. The second is going to cost a little money, but we need to bring the profession up.
I would say we hear the stat that over 50% of teachers who enter the profession quit after the first 2 years, before the first 2 years. But that number is a misnomer because the number at our high need schools where we need our best teachers is much, much higher. And so we're talking about having a shortage at high need schools, and we're talking pipeline right now, but really we need to talk about retention as well. If we're constantly putting fresh green faces in front of our neediest kids, and they're constantly burning out and leaving every 2 years, we can produce as more as you want to. That's not fixing the problem. We have to take the steps to make the job of working in a high poverty school sustainable and rewarding, right? Effective educators want to work where they feel valued and where they feel like they're making a difference. And they want to work with other effective educators who do the same thing. So I work in a building that's 80% students of color, 80% students of poverty, and our graduation rate's over 80%. 40% of our kids are in AP classes. College-going culture, post-secondary education is the norm. And what's happening is effective educators from other schools who don't like where they are and don't feel respected are coming to my building, right? And so what are the conditions we need to create in schools that make effective teachers want to work with our neediest students? The other thing I would say is that, again, growing your own teachers is really important. We need to diversify the profession. But if you're a kid of color who's miserable in school because of racism, because of poor instruction, because of, why in the world would you want to go back to the place you were miserable for 4 years, right? And so we have to A, make the work sustainable for teachers, and then B, make the schools places that kids want to come back to and work.
Really good suggestions. Any other questions over here?
Hi, Marty Orland. I understand that you as states and the chiefs as an organization are embracing this agenda, but I'm curious regarding what you think is an appropriate federal role at this critical juncture in promoting equity. What would you see both as a minimum in terms of an appropriate federal role, and what would be your ideal in terms of what the federal government should be doing?
That's a good question.
Well, we all want more authority at the state level. I mean, that's our mantra. But I'll just speak for myself. I think and I don't know the maximum and minimum. If I had a maximum, it would be the federal government leading this charge and leading it with us, to be honest with you. I think that lends something positive to the gestalt of equity. But in turn, at minimum, I would hope that we have the flexibility, but we also need to make sure that not only are we accountable, as you said, to the local level, as I was talking about the state level, but they give us money. We should have some expectation that the federal government's going to say, so how's that equity thing going? That's like the minimum, but in turn, I would say maximum. I'd like to see some really proactive cheerleading on this issue. It's huge. Like I said, moral imperative of our time. How can we do it without a federal partner?
That's a great answer.
And I think, just piggybacking off of what Tony shared, it's, I'd like for them to show that they have an understanding of what equity is. It's making sure that, there's an expectation that we're serving children, regardless of need. Again, I kind of focus on English language learners, focus on special needs students, focus on needs of, social and economic needs, focus on needs of sexuality, focus, and to know that you can't, there's not a menu, for equity. You can't pick and choose, say, okay, I'm going to focus on this group of students and I'm not going to provide opportunities for another, constituency or another community. I think, one is it's take a stand on equity, but be intentional about what equity means, federally.
I think shared goal is good. Because they can be a cheerleader and it's a bully pulpit. It's important. Right. So a shared goal is important. Money is important, but don't tell us how to do it.
Okay.
And that's what everyone's going to say. So.
All right. I think we have time for one more question right here.
Hi, Luann McNabb with the National Council of Teachers of English. What are your expectations with the reality of working with state legislators, school boards, city and county officials to get your recommendations implemented?
Should we start with the state legislature?
I couldn't quite understand the question.
Will you have these recommendations?
And I know that some state legislators may not agree with you on some issues, let's say even just the basic of transgender bathrooms. How are you all, as state chiefs, going to be able to work with your state legislators or your school boards that make these kind of decisions, or city and county officials that may do the funding? How are you going to work with them to get your recommendations implemented?
Okay.
Should we start with the state lawmaker?
Okay. It's not easy. Education policy is very messy. There are an awful lot of hands in it. So what's important is to try to identify where you might start this conversation and with the most effect. That may be it's going to differ from state to state. It could be your state school board. That might be where we would start it in Ohio. It may be among the superintendents groups. I don't know, it just varies tremendously. But it is not easy because there are so many people involved with this to adopt a statewide agenda that's pervasive through the legislative process, the bureaucratic process, and the teachers at the same time. So.
Yeah, I put it in my own context. That's the only thing I can do. I'm an independently elected state official. I don't have a state board, and I think that works out pretty cool.
Yeah, no state board.
No state board. But the important thing for me to always remember is that there's other policymakers out there that I work with. But being an independent, I can take the bully pulpit and I can talk about things at maybe a different level publicly. Now this is going to get into a Hillary thing. Talk about things at a high level and with passion around this moral imperative. But yet, I know darn well when I sit down with Republican legislators, and that's most of them are in the state of Wisconsin now, I need to find ways to find common ground. And that is absolutely my bottom line. We have to do something positive for kids. Start out high, try to stay up at that level as long as I possibly can, but then find a way to accomplish things for kids.
I would say the challenge isn't as hard as we think it is. Peggy's a Republican. The equivalent in my state, Hans Zeiger, is also a Republican, and him and I have a great relationship. Sometimes you have to make an economic argument, and I can make an economic argument about equity very much and very quickly. Somebody mentioned earlier on how the return on investment on early childhood ed is 8 to 1. Like, that sells. If the United States is going to remain competitive, we need an educated populace. And if half of the country or half the students are students of color, we need to meet their needs. And so, like, that's the argument. Like, equity is what's right and what's best for us to keep us competitive going forward. And I don't buy into the idea that Republicans have an ingrained bias against these issues. Like, they believe in the American dream just like I do, in the same way that I do. And I'm completely willing to sit down and work with Republicans to pass this kind of legislation.
And I can share quickly. So I'm appointed secretary, and fortunate for me, my boss is kind of right on board with all of these. We're able to move forward. In addition to everything that's shared, I think engaging your local constituency is extremely important. I think for us, I mean, one of the benefits to me or detriments in being appointed is that I have an expiration date. So I try to get as much done as I can, and and educate as many people as I can, so that the work continues even when I'm not the person sitting in that seat. So for us, it's important to educate thoroughly the folks who are going to be around for a longer period of time.
Okay. And unfortunately, I think we have to end on that note, but I want to thank everybody here so much for joining us for this discussion. Thank you.
Good job. Good job. Thank you. Good job. Great girl.